just the opportunity to deal with the deep buried discomfort that people still have, men and women.
When Robert Redford passed away at 89 in his Sundance home, tributes poured in from friends and stars, but it was Meryl Streep's short message that caught everyone's attention. In that simple message, Streep revealed secrets that had been hidden for decades. Could there be more behind her words? Join us as we uncover the truth behind this confession. Meryl Streep and Robert Redford's lasting connection. When two great talents meet on screen, something rare happens. For Meryl Streep and Robert Redford, that magic came alive in their work together. But it did not stop when the cameras were turned off. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, professional admiration, and a quiet friendship that lasted across decades. To understand why Meryl Streep's words about Robert Redford carried so much weight, it is important to look back at the journey they shared, both in front of audiences and behind the scenes. Their most famous collaboration came in the mid-80s, when they starred together in Out of Africa. The film told the story of passion, loss, and courage, but it was the bond between Streep and Redford that gave the story its heart. On screen, their chemistry felt effortless. They brought two very different characters to life, and yet every scene between them felt natural, as if the two of them had been paired together many times before. Audiences around the world believed in their love story, not only because of the script, but because of the tenderness they carried into each moment. That film won awards and praise, but for many people it is remembered most for the spark between its two stars. More than 20 years later, they came together again for Lions for Lambs. By then, both had already built legendary careers. This second project was not a sweeping romance, but a sharp political drama, yet it proved how versatile and enduring their partnership could be. Even in a very different kind of story, their respect for each other's skills was clear. Redford, as both actor and director, worked closely with Streep to create something thoughtful and challenging. Their ability to collaborate again after so many years showed how strong their professional bond had become. Over the years, Meryl Streep was often asked about Robert Redford in interviews. Her answers always carried warmth. She spoke of his talent, his quiet strength, and his ability to bring authenticity to every role. She admired the way he dedicated himself not only to acting, but also to directing and supporting new voices in film through the Sundance Institute. Streep, known for her dedication to the craft, clearly saw in him a peer who cared deeply about the art of storytelling. She also described him as someone with grace and humility, qualities that stood out in an industry often full of ego. There were never public signs of conflict or rivalry between them. Instead, their words about each other painted a picture of steady admiration. Redford was famously private, and Streep often guarded her personal life from the spotlight, so the glimpses they gave about their friendship were subtle but meaningful. Neither needed to exaggerate or perform for attention. Their respect spoke through small gestures, kind words, and the way they continued to honor each other's work over the years. When Streep shared her tribute after his passing, it was short but full of meaning. Some may have expected a long statement or detailed stories, but her words reflected the quiet strength of their relationship. She called him a lion, a symbol of both his dignity and the unforgettable power he brought to his roles. She also called him her friend, a reminder that behind all the cameras and fame, their bond was personal. It was not about drawing attention to herself, but about honoring him with simplicity and love. The subtext of her statement was clear to anyone who had followed their journeys. Streep was not speaking as a distant colleague giving polite words. She was speaking as someone who had shared unforgettable moments with Redford, both in their films and in the life of Hollywood itself. Her respect for his craft was matched by affection for the man himself. She did not need to say more, because their history together had already spoken volumes. In the end, what stands out about their relationship is the balance of admiration and friendship. They were peers in every sense of the word. Two artists who valued each other's gifts, supported each other's work, and treated one another with quiet dignity. That is why her tribute touched so many. It was not dramatic or heavy, but it carried the weight of decades of shared history. Meryl Streep and Robert Redford may not have worked together often, but when they did, the results were unforgettable. However, this bond came to a natural close with the peaceful passing of Robert Redford at the age of 89. Robert Redford's peaceful farewell in Sundance. On the morning of September 16, 2025, the world awoke to the news that Robert Redford had passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 89 years old. His home in Sundance, Utah, the place he built into a haven for independent artists, became the final resting place of one of Hollywood's most iconic figures. For fans who admired him for decades, the news felt like the closing of a long, beautiful story. The circumstances of his passing carried a kind of quiet dignity that mirrored the man himself. Redford had always valued privacy. He lived his life with grace, often avoiding the noisy chaos of fame, preferring to focus on his work, his family, and the causes that mattered to him. To know that he passed in the comfort of his home, surrounded by the land he had cherished and protected for so long, brought comfort to many who loved and respected him. His death was not sudden or dramatic. Instead, it was calm, natural, and peaceful, much like the way he carried himself throughout his extraordinary life. The news sparked an outpouring of tributes from all corners of the world. Actors, filmmakers, politicians, and ordinary people who had been touched by his performances came together in shared grief. Among the first to speak was Jane Fonda, who had worked with Redford on multiple films. She described not just the actor, but the man behind the roles, a person of warmth and deep character. Her words reminded people that beyond the screen, Redford was someone who carried kindness and conviction into every part of his life. Meryl Streep, who created unforgettable memories with him in Out of Africa, shared a tender tribute that carried the weight of their friendship and professional bond. She honored him in simple but moving language, showing how much he meant to her personally. Barbra Streisand, another co-star who shared the screen with him in The Way We Were, painted a picture of Redford's intelligence and charisma. Dustin Hoffman, who acted alongside him in All the President's Men, remembered the joy and inspiration of working with him. Each of these voices captured a different side of Redford, and together they formed a portrait of a man who was admired by his peers, not only for his craft, but for his humanity. Tributes extended beyond the entertainment world. Former and current leaders, including presidents and first ladies, offered their words of respect. Redford was more than a movie star. He was a symbol of American storytelling, resilience, and integrity. Filmmakers like Martin Scorsese and Ron Howard expressed their admiration as well, recognizing the legacy he left behind not only on screen, but also through his work with the Sundance Institute, which gave countless artists a chance to tell their stories. Plans for his farewell matched his character. Redford, who never craved spectacle, was set to be interred on his beloved Sundance property. The funeral would be low-key, reflecting his wish for simplicity and privacy. There would be no grand displays, only a quiet goodbye in the place that had defined so much of his later life. For someone who valued authenticity, this was the most fitting way to leave the world. Amidst all of the tributes, Streep's words stood out for their simplicity and depth. What made her choice of words capture so much attention? Meryl Streep's gentle farewell to Robert Redford. When news of Robert Redford's passing reached the world, countless voices rose to honor him. Friends, colleagues, and admirers each shared their memories of the actor, director, and storyteller who had shaped generations. Among those voices, one stood out with quiet power, Meryl Streep's. Her words were not long, but they carried the weight of history, friendship, and respect. Streep released her statement through her publicist, timed soon after the announcement of Redford's death. She chose not to make an elaborate speech or appear in front of cameras. Instead, she offered a few carefully chosen words. "One of the lions has passed. Rest in peace, my lovely friend." In that single sentence, she captured what he meant to her, to their craft, and to the world of cinema. The phrase "one of the lions" immediately struck people with its beauty. To those who remembered Out of Africa, the film they made together in the mid-'80s, the image was familiar. Lions in that story represented more than animals on a savanna. They were symbols of strength, majesty, and timelessness. By calling Redford a lion, Streep honored him as a figure of greatness, someone who stood tall in his field and left a presence that would not easily fade. Her tribute was affectionate yet restrained. It showed deep love and admiration without spilling into long explanations. The tone was sweet and respectful, echoing the way Streep has always carried herself in public life. It did not dwell on sadness, but instead elevated Redford as a legend, someone to be remembered for his grace, his talent, and his enduring influence. What made her words even more striking was the contrast with other tributes. Jane Fonda, who had worked with Redford multiple times across her career, shared a longer and more emotional message. She described their closeness and how deeply his loss had shaken her. Her words painted him as both a dear friend and an icon of values she cherished. Her grief was raw, full of memories and emotion, reflecting a friendship that stretched back decades. Other voices joined in as well. Filmmakers like Ron Howard praised Redford's contributions not only as an actor, but as a director and mentor to many young talents. Actors like Marlee Matlin spoke about how he had opened doors for people who often went unheard in Hollywood. Politicians and cultural figures highlighted his activism, his passion for the environment, and his role as the founder of the Sundance Institute. Placed among these tributes, Streep's message stood apart. It was brief, yet it resonated deeply. Where others poured out long recollections, she gave a line that carried the weight of poetry. Some saw in it a reflection of her style, measured, thoughtful, never overdone. Others felt it showed just how much she trusted the world to understand the depth of her connection with Redford without needing every detail. Her use of the word friend was especially tender. It reminded people that their relationship was not just one of co-stars. It was rooted in trust, respect, and personal affection. By calling him her lovely friend, Streep reminded the world that behind the lights and awards were two human beings who had shared a meaningful bond. This balance of simplicity and depth gave her statement a lasting power. It captured Redford's grandeur through the metaphor of the lion, while also bringing him down to the intimacy of friendship. It felt both universal and personal, much like Redford himself, who had been a global star but always carried himself with humility. In a sea of tributes, each filled with love and grief, Streep's words were like a whisper that lingered long after it was spoken. They invited people to pause, to remember, and to honor Redford not with noise but with quiet reverence. She said only what needed to be said, and in doing so, she gave the world a farewell that matched the man. Elegant, powerful, and unforgettable. But could there be more tied to this simple message? Let's find out. The truth behind Meryl Streep's farewell to Robert Redford. When Robert Redford passed away at the age of 89, the world of cinema stood still. Tributes poured in from friends, colleagues, and fans across the globe. Among them, Meryl Streep's message caught particular attention. It was brief, tender, and respectful. Yet headlines quickly began to frame it in dramatic ways, using words like, "finally break silence," or, "and it's bad." The truth, however, tells a different story, one that reflects more about how the media packages grief than about what Streep truly said. In the hours following Redford's death, the timing of Streep's statement became a talking point. She spoke after other close collaborators like Jane Fonda, and this simple delay was stretched into claims that she had been silent. In reality, there was no unusual gap. Publicists often coordinate the release of such words, ensuring they are respectful and timed appropriately. Streep did not withhold her voice, nor did she avoid acknowledging Redford. She simply took her moment, and when she spoke, she chose words that carried depth without excess. The phrase, "finally breaks silence," is not rooted in truth, but in the expectations of celebrity news. Audiences have been conditioned to believe that tributes must come instantly, almost as if grief were a race. In truth, mourning does not follow a schedule, and public figures often need time to craft a message that feels right. By presenting her statement as though it were overdue, the media turned a natural pause into a narrative of tension that never existed. The sensational framing did not stop there. Some outlets described her message as bad, as if it carried hidden negativity. But Streep's words were clear and kind. She called Redford a lion, honoring his strength and stature, and she addressed him as her lovely friend. There was no regret, no criticism, no bitterness. Still, headlines twisted the tone, presenting a loving farewell as if it contained drama. This reveals more about the media's hunger for clicks than about Streep's intention. Such framing happens often because the public is drawn to conflict. A simple tribute may be beautiful, but it does not always capture attention in the same way a rumored dispute might. Phrases like "break silence" or "it's bad" are familiar tricks in digital news. They create curiosity, drawing readers in with a suggestion of scandal. The problem is that they rarely reflect reality. In this case, the reality was a heartfelt message of love and respect. When fact-checking the coverage, it becomes clear that there was no controversy in her words. She did not suggest anything negative about Redford, nor did she distance herself from him. Quite the opposite. She acknowledged his greatness and called him her friend. Anyone searching for regret or criticism would find none, because it simply was not there. Beyond the noise of headlines, the cultural meaning of her words stands strong. By calling him one of the lions, Streep evoked not only their shared film Out of Africa, but also the symbolism of lions themselves. Lions represent majesty, courage, and leadership. They are timeless figures in both nature and storytelling. Through this metaphor, she placed Redford among the greats, someone whose presence commanded respect and whose absence leaves a void. Her words also revealed something personal. She did not only call him an actor or a colleague, she called him a friend. That choice of word made the tribute intimate, reminding the world that behind the glamour of Hollywood were two people who had shared real connection. To her, he was not just a screen partner, but a companion in a shared journey of art. The public reacted strongly to her statement. Many praised the simplicity of her farewell, noting how it captured both grandeur and tenderness in just a few words. On social media, fans repeated the phrase, "one of the lions," turning it into a symbol of Redford's legacy. Others admired her restraint, contrasting her brief message with the longer tributes of other stars. Some critics, however, wondered if her words were too short, expecting more stories or emotional details. But in truth, brevity was part of the beauty. Her farewell also highlighted how celebrity mourning has changed in modern media. Where once tributes might be shared in private or delayed, today they are dissected instantly. Every word is weighed, every pause questioned. Streep's choice to keep her message short showed dignity and respect. Yet the way the media packaged it reminded the public of how easily grief can be turned into spectacle. Of course, there will always be those who interpret simplicity as distance. Some people may have wanted her to share personal memories, anecdotes, or longer reflections. Others might have compared her words unfavorably to Jane Fonda's more detailed tribute. Yet such expectations reveal more about what the public demands than about Streep herself. She has always carried herself with grace, often choosing understatement over excess. However, there is more to Redford's story than what fans know. The hidden battles behind the golden smile. Robert Redford's name has long been tied to charm, talent, and a legacy that reshaped Hollywood. To many, he seemed untouchable, an actor, director, and activist who lived a dream life under the spotlight. Yet behind his golden image were very human struggles, quiet challenges, and painful losses that shaped the man he became. His story was not only about fame and success, but also about resilience in the face of hardship. From an early age, Redford's path was touched by illness. When he was about 11 years old, he contracted a mild case of polio. Though it did not paralyze him, the sickness forced him into bed for a long stretch of time. For a boy filled with energy and curiosity, being confined was frustrating and frightening. The illness came at a time when the world was still gripped by fear of polio, and families lived with uncertainty whenever a child fell ill. But this setback became a turning point in his life. Once he recovered, he traveled with his family to Yosemite, where the sight of towering cliffs, wide skies, and endless wilderness left a mark on his heart. That early exposure to nature, following his struggle with illness, gave him a deep appreciation for the environment, something that would remain central to his identity forever. The fight against sickness planted in him both a love for the natural world and an understanding of vulnerability. As Redford grew older, the battles he faced shifted from physical illness to personal loss. Family tragedies would become some of the deepest wounds he carried. His first son, Scott Anthony Redford, was born in 1959. For Robert and his wife, welcoming their child was a moment of pure joy. But just 2.5 months later, tragedy struck. Baby Scott died suddenly from infant death syndrome. Losing a child is an unbearable sorrow, and for Redford, it was an event that left a permanent scar on his soul. The joy of fatherhood had been cut short, replaced with grief that he would never fully overcome. Years later, another heartbreak followed. His middle son, James, also called Jamie, struggled with health problems for much of his life. He suffered from liver disease, underwent transplants, and lived with the constant shadow of illness. Despite these challenges, Jamie channeled his pain into purpose, founding organizations that promoted awareness around organ donation and environmental issues. But in 2020, at the age of 58, Jamie passed away from bile duct cancer. For Robert, losing a second son brought back waves of grief he had known too well. It was another reminder that even a life filled with fame and success cannot shield anyone from the cruel hand of loss. Before Redford became a global star, he faced difficulties in his academic and personal life. School was never easy for him. He struggled with grades and discipline, often finding himself distracted or uninterested in classroom rules. As a teenager, he made mistakes, slipping into minor delinquent behaviors such as petty theft and breaking into places. These were not the actions of a hardened criminal, but rather signs of a restless boy searching for direction. His challenges continued when he entered the University of Colorado. College life, instead of setting him on a straight path, only magnified his struggles. He turned to drinking, lost focus in his studies, and was eventually expelled. At that moment, Redford seemed far from the polished man the world would one day admire. But it was in those early missteps that he discovered what he truly wanted. Failure became a stepping stone, pushing him toward the arts and eventually toward the career that would change his life. Yet even with professional triumphs, the emotional battles never fully left him. Losing baby Scott at the start of his fatherhood journey left a wound that time could not heal. Redford carried that grief quietly, acknowledging that such a loss is not something a parent ever forgets. Each achievement, no matter how glittering, was shadowed by the memory of what was lost. And when Jamie died decades later, the weight of grief deepened. These personal struggles reminded him of life's fragility and made him appreciate more deeply the time he had with his family and the causes he fought for. As for his health, Redford did not suffer from major chronic conditions that threatened his work in a lasting way. While there have been whispers of skin cancer or hearing loss, such claims are not strongly supported by reliable sources. What is clear, however, is that he managed to maintain an active, vibrant career well into his later years. The resilience he showed in his work echoed the strength he had built through earlier battles. Illness and hardship had entered his life, but they did not define him. Instead, they pushed him to keep going, to pour himself into his passions, and to share his voice on screen and beyond. The picture of Robert Redford that most people know is of a handsome actor, a skilled director, and an environmental champion. Despite his success, Robert Redford faced controversies that at times threatened to overshadow everything he built. The shadows behind the spotlight. Robert Redford is remembered as a man of great charm, an actor who lit up screens, and a director who brought stories to life with depth and beauty. His name carried a golden glow, and his image was tied to grace, strength, and timeless appeal. Yet no life in the public eye is without its shadows, and Redford's was no exception. Beneath his polished reputation lay moments of criticism, controversy, and complex relationships that showed he was not just a legend, but also a man with flaws, choices, and contradictions. One of the most talked about challenges to Redford's image came from Jane Fonda, his longtime co-star. Over decades, the two worked together in films that defined eras and set new standards for romance on screen. But Fonda later revealed that behind the scenes, Redford was not always easy to work with. She spoke of him arriving late on set, carrying moods that made the work atmosphere heavy, and showing little enthusiasm for on-screen affection. For an actress often cast alongside him in romantic stories, this behavior was confusing and sometimes hurtful. Fonda admitted she once thought his coldness was her fault, as though she had done something wrong. Yet she also insisted that Redford was, at heart, a good man. Her words created a complex picture, one of a talented actor whose brilliance did not always extend to warmth in professional relationships. This glimpse behind the curtain reminded people that even icons could struggle with simple human interactions. Beyond personal relationships, Redford also faced criticism in an area he cared about deeply: environmental activism. For much of his life, he was one of Hollywood's most outspoken voices for the planet. He fought to protect wilderness, promoted clean energy, and tied his name to campaigns against reckless development. But with that strong stance came greater scrutiny. Some accused him of hypocrisy when his personal choices appeared to clash with his public message. A short film even labeled him a hypocrite, pointing to his sale of undeveloped land near his Sundance property in Utah. Critics argued that while he opposed development elsewhere, he was willing to profit from it in his backyard. Adding to this perception was his decision to accept work as a voiceover for an airline, despite speaking against the environmental damage linked to air travel. To his supporters, these were small missteps in an otherwise noble fight. To his critics, they showed a man who could not always live up to the ideals he preached. For Redford, this tension between public passion and private choices was one of the most difficult parts of his activism. Another layer of complexity in his career came from the way the world saw him. Robert Redford was undeniably handsome, with the kind of classic looks that Hollywood loved to spotlight. From the earliest days of his fame, he was branded a heartthrob, a leading man whose beauty drew audiences as much as his acting. While this image helped him rise to stardom, it also became a burden. Many critics, and even Redford himself, felt frustration at how often his talent was overlooked in favor of his appearance. Instead of being recognized for the depth of his performances, he was sometimes pigeonholed into roles that emphasized romance, charm, or heroism. Though he brought truth and skill to every character, he longed to explore more flawed, complex, and raw parts that went beyond surface appeal. The struggle between his looks and his craft became a quiet battle, one that shaped the way he viewed his career and legacy. As the years passed, Redford's relationship with Hollywood grew more complicated. There were moments when he announced his plans to retire, only to step back from those statements later. In one breath, he would speak of leaving acting behind, and in the next, he would appear again on screen, unwilling to completely close the door. This ambivalence puzzled fans and critics alike. Some saw it as indecision, others as a natural struggle with aging in an industry that demands constant reinvention. For Redford, it may have been more personal. He was not only an actor but also an activist and a director. Each identity pulled him in different directions, and the thought of leaving any of them behind was not easy. His wavering stance reflected the tension of a man torn between love for his craft and the desire for peace after decades in the spotlight. Taken together, these moments of criticism and controversy painted a fuller picture of Robert Redford. He was not just the perfect star people saw on posters and screens. He was a man who sometimes stumbled in relationships, who carried the weight of accusations against his causes, who fought against the box his looks had built for him, and who wrestled with the decision of when to let go. Far from diminishing him, these complexities made his story richer. They revealed that greatness often coexists with imperfection, and that even legends must navigate the same struggles of identity, choice, and balance that shape all lives. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.